Well, good evening. I was not in here earlier because I am trying to talk a young couple out of getting married. No, I'm just trying to help them when they're getting ready to be married, going through some things, and trying to give them an idea what to look for in marriage and what some of the pitfalls are and those kind of stuff. So we're trying to get them ready to take that step here before too long. So, as we've been going, man, this is getting close to a year that we started in the Gospels, harmonizing the Gospels, taking all four Gospels, pulling the stories together, following it from the time that Jesus was, coming on the scene and being born, and then his ministry beginning and all of that. And so this is lesson 49, so just a couple more lessons. It'll be a full year. And I don't even think we're even a third through yet. And I knew it was going to take a while. But so we're in the part of the Sermon on the Mount. And so we had spent like almost over 2 months, talking about the Sermon on the Mount, where we went through the whole thing as general, and then we went through each blessing, and then we went through the woes, and then what was the salt and the light, and so forth. And so we're continuing in that Sermon on the Mount. Now, there is no other harmonizing at this point. There's no other scriptures. We have another gospel that gives a little bit of the Sermon on the Mount and chimes in here and there. But tonight we're still in Matthew. And just let me say, we are now in the portion where Jesus takes the opportunity to begin to expound on the law in a whole different way than what the people or the Pharisees had been living as such for the law. So to say that tonight, listen, I'm just a deliverer of the message tonight, okay? If you're going to get mad at anybody, take it up with Jesus, all right? He's the one who said it. And because he was being very frank about the situation that he saw with the Pharisees and the religious leaders and the people of that day. And so in Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 through 32 is where we're going to tackle. I was trying to go farther, but man, this was enough to keep us going just for tonight. So Jesus continues and he says this. He said, "You have heard that it was said by them of old, 'Thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, thou rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee. Leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to the brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thy adversary quickly while thou art in the way with him, lest anything the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto thee that thou shalt no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing." Now I'm going to stop there, and let's just tackle these verses first tonight. So as we look back, the Sermon on the Mount is about kingdom living. It's about how believers can live in the kingdom or live in this world successfully, as we might say, that will challenge us not just to talk about external actions, but really gets down to the root of the thoughts and the emotions. And so tonight we're going to look at this, and it says murder by anger. And so your first blank tonight, there's two versions, okay? Your first blank tonight, there's two versions of murder and judgment that are presented. When we talk about two murders, we're talking about two different aspects, two different perspectives that we might say tonight about this thing. So, number one, the first version is the law of murder. Now, this comes from, of course, Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. It comes from the Ten Commandments that says that thou shalt not kill. Now, remember, let me jump back just a little bit for last week. Remember that Jesus said that he come to fulfill the law. He came to expand the law. We've said, yes, there are some laws from the Old Testament that we would not abide with today because Jesus has gave us different commands other than that. But there are some things in the Old Testament commandments that we still honor today. And one of them would be, thou shalt not kill. We don't believe in murder. And so Jesus come to fulfill the law, but he said, I didn't come to take away the law. Well, unless he's overridden it, we still abide by thou shalt not murder. And then the punishment of killing a person was found in Leviticus 24:21. It says that he that killeth a beast, he shall be restored, and that he that killeth a man, he shall be put to death. And so Numbers also 35:16 says, if he smite him with an instrument of iron so that he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. So the old view of the murderer, or the consequence of murder, was that anybody who murdered someone, they too were put to death, okay? And so that was one view. And then it talks about, number 3, the Jewish appointees or council. It's the council who would determine who was guilty. And so if a man did kill somebody and he's found guilty, it's done by the appointees of the council. That comes from Deuteronomy 16:18. Judges and officers shall make thee and all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee throughout the tribes. They shall judge the people with such judgment. Now, we notice that this is what Jesus, number 4, says that you have heard from those from the past. So that's what he's talking about. He said, now you've heard from the past, right, that this is murder. And he said, I want you to understand, and Jesus would agree with that murder is murder and it's not right. But what is he talking about here? What is he alluding to here now when he's speaking about the law of murder? What's he trying to get their attention to think about? Well, number 5 says, during the time of Jesus, the Jewish religious leaders focused mainly on an outward action, obeying the commandment. And so Jesus is wanting them to see that they always just kind of rely on the outer action. Okay, he murdered someone. This is the outer action. He must die too, right? That's kind of it. So was the Pharisees wrong in their action? No, because the law demanded that murderer's life be taken as well because of their action. But number 7, I think it would be safe to say that we all believe murder is the taking of the life of someone is what we would call a sin, right? That's what we believe. We believe that taking somebody's life is a sin because we're called not to murder people. We're called to love people. And so for the sin, murdering someone would face that judgment of death, as we would say, a separation from God if they're lost, you know. So number B, is Jesus disagreeing or arguing for murder? Well, here's the answer that we can see. Jesus does not disagree with the sin of murder. That's not what he's talking about. But he takes it to a deeper level in explaining what sin is. Remember, he come to expand it, right? So he's going to take it to a deeper level. He wants them to see something different. Number 2, Jesus teaches that it's just not the physical act of murder that is sinful, but even the emotions and feelings of anger and hatred towards another person. All right? He wants us to see beyond just a murder and then somebody dying and then somebody else dying. He wants to get us, why did it happen? That's what he's trying to get to. What is it? What's behind the murder? Is that even important? And if so, why? Well, let's look at it this way, okay? You go to the doctor and they treat you with your issue, whatever that is. In a few days, right? Great. Just in a few days, things are normal, right? You're taking the medication, you seem normal. You run out of the medication, and guess what happens? You're back where you started. So you go to another doctor. And with the same exam, you get the same result. But this time, the doctor, instead of treating your external issue, finds the root of the cause and sends you on your way. And the result is that you never have the issue again. Why is that? It's because one doctor treated the external issue while the other doctor found the eternal issue and doctored it up, fixed it for you. Okay? This is what Jesus is getting at. Number 4, murder is an external action. But what was the root of the problem of someone murdering another person. And Jesus said that it was anger. Jesus said that it was anger. You know, one of the first messages I had the first of the year when we talked about emotions was the word anger, right? And here's what Jesus brings this in. He goes in, number 5, Jesus takes it a step further by addressing the root of the problem, our thoughts and emotions toward others. He said that this is the root of the problem. This is why somebody murdered someone, is because it's an eternal position of inside of anger. And how does he do this? The same anger that causes someone to murder another is a sin, as well as someone having anger issues with a person for no just cause, Jesus says is a sin. That's number 6. Listen, I didn't say that. Jesus said that. The Pharisees are not looking at the internal problem, but Jesus is. He's saying, you know what? You guys are stuck on the part where if somebody murders somebody, that's the issue. Jesus says, no, I agree with that, but he says, I want to take it over here, and I want you to see the reason why that's happening. And the reason it's happening is because of anger. And I want you to know that, God, yes, somebody who kills somebody, that is a sin. But he says over here, he says, you know what? Even if you hate your brother, if you're angry with your brother for no just cause, you're a murderer. You're in sin. And anger has been a common emotion in every culture, period. Murder has been part of every cultural period. Being angry at others for no just cause, well, guess what? That's even today in our culture. We get mad at people for really no just cause. You know? And I've told you, I'm bad at it. It happened again today. I'm going up 231. I'm in the fast lane. Somebody's in a U-Haul truck in this fast lane, driving slower than the people in the slower lane. I'm getting angry for no just cause, technically. And I go around them. And the driver's on his phone. And, you know, if we allow that anger to build up, Jesus is saying that same anger you're displaying is the same as the anger of the murder that takes place. And so Jesus is trying to get us to look onto the inside of what's going on instead of just concentrating on the outside. Now, number 8, Jesus reminds us that it's just not our actions that are judged, but also our thoughts and words. That's what he wants us to say. He said it's what you're thinking. It's about the way and the words that you display. Number 9, being angry with someone without cause or calling someone a name such as Raka, which means senseless, stupid, shallow brains, carries the same weight as physically taking someone's life. That's what Jesus said. According to what Jesus said, he said, if you call somebody a name like that, it's almost like me driving by the guy in the U-Haul, rolling down my window and said, hey, senseless, stupid brain. Jesus is saying the way you treat that person is no different than the anger that somebody treated someone else to take their life. Because he says the thoughts and the anger is what causes this issue to happen. And he says, I want you to get to the issue. I want you to get to the root of the problem, and you need to get rid of the anger and not call people names. And that's why he said he'd come to really expand the wall, and that's what he's talking about. He says, you guys just look at it this end, but you're not looking to the inside what causes the murder. He said, that's what I want you to look at. I want you to look deep inside. So what is the remedy? Well, Jesus challenged people to change their hearts and deal with the anger in a righteous manner. And the question is that possible? Is it possible? Well, number 2, yes, Jesus shows us that righteous anger is allowed in the sense there's a great concern for a person's spiritual welfare. Okay? Look at We mentioned this about a month ago. We mentioned this, Mark 3:5, and when he had looked around about them in anger, being grieved of the hardness of their hearts, and Ephesians 4:26, be ye angry and sin not, let not not let the sun go down upon your wrath. So, as I told you, I have spent many, many hours researching different things, the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and just various things. And there's some things that I read in those, in what they believe. And it's a righteous anger inside of me that gets upset. Right? Why can somebody believe this? But then I have to turn and look at myself. What do I believe that seems so silly and selfish that would cause somebody else to look at me and say, well, how can they believe that? So taking the concept of world religions and apologetics, to be able to answer people for why I believe what I believe scripturally, not just my opinion, scripturally, to make sense for someone to say, you know what, that's who I want, is Jesus. And I think that the righteous anger that sometimes rises in us is because we are concerned about people. There are people, and I'll just be honest with you, there's people that come to this church that say they are saved that I have a righteous anger about because I'm not really sure about what they say they are and how they act and what they do in their life. I have a concern about that because you know what? That's a person that I personally know is going to spend eternity somewhere. And I think that we all should have that. If it's our family, if our friends, it's for anybody. The person we meet on the street, it's somebody that we have a righteous anger for because we want them to know the truth, which is the gospel. Number 3, Jesus urges us to make amends quickly before it's too late. So he says this. He says, you know, if you have this unjust anger, if you're angry at someone, he says, you need to make amends out of it quickly. He says, I want you to do it before it's too late. Before you come to the altar with a gift, and before you come to worship, you find that person that you're angry towards. Number 4, people must reconcile with that person that they are angry before offering their gift. In other words, they have to go and they have to get their emotions right. They have to get their feelings right. They have to get their actions right. They have to get everything right so that they can come and worship because God wants a heart before Him that is honest and so forth. And yet, how serious is this? Well, it's so serious that even, not only does Matthew talk about it, but John does too. John says this. He says, whosoever hated his brother is a murderer. And you know that a murderer hath not eternal life abiding in him. That's how serious Jesus was expanding the law for them to see, is that not just that it's murder and killing someone, but that it's the action inside or the internal feelings inside that's causing this action that's very important. And Jesus wants to deal with the whole inside, not just the outside. So he said, do it on the spot. Do it now rather than later, right? He says, do it away. So what's the conclusion? Well, it's very easy. It's easier said than done, right? It's easier said than done to be reconciled. It's easier said to be done to be reconciled with someone who has hurt us or whom we've had strained relationship. But as followers of Christ, we are called just to do that. I remember a time in my life, Monica and I had moved to Florida. And so, talking about faith, Monica and I left Indiana. We moved to Florida. I thought I had a job. When I got there, I didn't have a job. And so I had to find a job. Monica had to find a job. We had to find a place to live. And so we're there in Florida. And so before all that happened, there was an issue when I left Florida. I had an issue with one of my family members. I ended up working for my family member who had bought a business, and I went to work for him, and some things, as I moved back to Indiana, some things were done that I didn't agree with, and so we had a very constrained relationship, and we'd been close all of our life. So when we moved back to Indiana, I had bought a business, and Monica had a business, and I had a business, and every January we would take off, and we'd go to Florida. And when we went to Florida, we went to a church, and part of the time we were in Florida was always a week revival at a particular church, and that's where we went. And it was on one night that my cousin was there. And the pastor or the preacher that night was talking about reconciliation and forgiveness. So I asked him to come down to the altar with me so that we could get it right. And it's tough. It's not about who was right, who was wrong. It's about reconciliation when you know about what's wrong in your life, right? Number 2, it says we're to offer our gifts at the altar with a heart reconciled with our brothers and sisters. And that's exactly what we did. It's the willing to forgive, ask for forgiveness. It's about asking to rebuild that relationship. It's all about that. Number 3, the power of reconciliation lies in the ability to bring about healing and restoration. It's not about winning an argument. It's not proving who was wrong and who was right. But it's actually restoring relationship, showing love and forgiveness just as Christ loved us and forgave us. And number 4, remember this. What did we see earlier in the Sermon on the Mount? What did we see? Didn't he say, as Christians, we are called to be what? Peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. And this passage teaches us that true righteousness requires us to go beyond the surface and address the root of our conflicts. Number 5, furthermore, not only does reconciliation bring about peace and unity, but it also protects us from further consequences. So what happens? We have this feeling of anger. Remember, this is the way it works. Anger is a feeling, or is emotion. That emotion causes feelings. Those feelings are usually toward anger, from anger, are usually negative. It means that we'll hold on to unforgiveness. It could lead to bitterness, resentment. And so now we got the emotion of anger. Now it's penetrated with feelings, and then we take action from there. And he says, man, there's consequences to this. And so 6, Jesus says that it's better to quickly agree with the other person or agree to forgive rather than to escalate the conflict, possibly even resulting in legal consequences. I don't know about you, but I've known several church members who've taken other church members to court because of anger and bitterness that have taken place. And so he's asking us to resolve this in a way that is correct. All right, so let's go on to the next one. He said, you have heard in verse 27, you have heard that it was said by them of old that thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee, and for though thy members should perish, that thy whole body should not be cast into hell. And if the right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it out for thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of the members should perish, and not the whole body that shall be cast into hell. It hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put his wife away, saving the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery. So let's take a look at what he says here. Okay, adultery by thought, the 7th commandment. That's what we're looking at, the 7th commandment. So guess what he does? He goes back to the commands again, and he's talking about the 7th commandment this time. Number 1, Jesus refers back to the 7th commandment, to which the Jewish community had strict laws about adultery and divorce. Now, I say strict laws. It's only strict in the culture that you were in. It depends on which sect of the Jews that you were in, whether it was how strict it was to some degree. Now, you remember in Exodus 20:14, it says, thou shalt not commit adultery. That's part of the 10 Commandments. But we see it again in Deuteronomy 24:1-4. And he says this. He says, when a man taketh a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she has no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, then he'll let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it to her hand and send her out of the house. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her and write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, the first one, may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled for the abomination of the Lord, for thou shalt not cause the land to sin, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. Now, I read that because I want you to understand something. Notice the words, when it comes to pass when she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her. What in the world does that mean? Did she make the spaghetti wrong? I mean, what is it? There's nothing there to tell us exactly what it could have been in the words. Now, there could be some guesses and some opinions, but it didn't really tell us. Well, here's the thing. Number 4, this is where we're going to get to for your blank. From one school of thought, the Hillel, which among the rabbis, put the interpretation that a man might divorce his wife for any unbecomingness. So if a man come home and he found his wife dressed in a way he didn't like, he could say, I'm divorcing you. I'm writing out a piece of paper, get out of my house. Okay? Whatever that is. And he goes on to say, or indeed for any cause. Or for any cause. I mean, he could just come up with something. Now, that seems to be some of the school of thought in the day of the Pharisees, because if you'll remember in Matthew 19:3, the Pharisees asked Jesus, tempting him and saying to him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? You see, they wanted to see where he was leaning to, right? And so they said for any cause, okay? They wanted to know. Now, the school of Shammai, on the other hand, taught only for something disgraceful, such as adultery, which is your blank, could a wife be divorced. So you have one who says for anything, and then you have another one that says adultery only, okay? And so this is the thing. Now, the scripture in Deuteronomy declares that a bill of divorce shall be written. It states that the union has been separated. That's what the bill of divorcement was, that they have separated. Notice that we never find the words that adultery has been committed, for if so, really, she would have been stoned, according to the law. So for whatever reason it was, to me, she was let go. She was separated from the original intent of the marriage. Now, as the woman is sent out of the house, it is evident by the people that she knows and she goes by that she goes out and marries another, and they know that. And for whatever reason, she finds herself unmarried again. But the first husband can't take her back. Okay? Number 8, we mostly think about this topic of divorce, but what it applies here is the protection of the woman from going back into the same situation as before when the man dismissed her. So really, what this is setting up, the Lord is protecting the woman again. In my eyes, he's protecting her from not going back to the first marriage, because if he found anything in her the first time, guess what's going to happen probably the second time? The same thing. So he's kind of protecting her from not going through all this drama and problems. Now, number 9, where there is adultery, well then a serious sin has been committed in a marriage relationship where one or maybe both have no regard for the commitment they have made to one another. However, this is not what the Lord is getting at. Okay, this is not what he's getting into here so much, because everybody would have known that adultery was wrong, because adultery meant, right, that they would stone them. But that's, again, this is what he's getting at. He wants them to look at something. Is Jesus disagreeing or agreeing for adultery? Well, Jesus acknowledged that the people had been taught not to commit physical adultery. However, Jesus takes it a step further and speaks about the heart. Again, he's expanding or fulfilling the law. He's giving the information to them to hear. He says that anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. This shows us that God cares not only about our actions, but our thoughts and desires. Okay? Number 2, in God's eyes, emotional fidelity is just important as physical fidelity. In other words, Jesus' intention is, therefore, to prohibit not a natural sexual attraction, but the deliberate harboring of a desire for illicit relationship. In other words, here's what we're getting at. And it's a fine line in our culture today, okay? So it's a fine line. So if I walk by a lady and I say, oh, you look very beautiful today. Okay? People can take that either way, right? Am I being sincere? Am I hitting on her? What is that? I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard for men today to compliment another woman without some probably accusation that comes that way, right? But Jesus is not talking about that. What Jesus is talking about is this thought process that when we look at another woman, and I guess we could reverse the roles here, but he uses this, that if I say, oh, you see that woman over there? I know she's married, but I'm going to make her mine. I'm going to steal her from that man over there. And I'm going to work myself into her life. I'm going to work myself into this emotional relationship. I'm going to work myself until I can get her attention and take it away from him and steal her from that guy over there. You say, is that what he's talking about? I think so. You say, how do you know that? Well, what is the command that's often forgotten? This is a command, right? Exodus 20:17. What did he say? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Manservant, maidservant, his ox, his ass, or anything in thy neighbor's. What Jesus is saying, we shouldn't covet anything from anybody. I shouldn't go to Eric and say, man, I covet Eric's boat. Can't wait till he goes to bed. I'm going to back my truck up in there and put it on my hitch, and I'm taking it home. He won't care. Number one, I don't have a truck, so I'll have to borrow the church van to do it. So if you see me in a church van with a boat, you know that I've done something wrong, right? It's coveting something that belongs to someone else, and that's what Jesus is talking about. And when he talks about lusting after another woman, it's not looking at her beauty, and I could be wrong. It's not about looking at her beauty and just say, oh, she's a beautiful lady. It's the desire to have that lady and to take her from someone else. Because that's what he's talking about when he talks about fulfilling the law. You know, he's expanding the law for us to see that. And so, number 4, Jesus is looking at what happens first in this adulterous affair. The adultery is a result of an inner lustful desire to have a woman that is not his. Okay? That's what he's talking about. Think about number 5. Think about what Jesus is saying here and how true it is, pointing out the person in our culture, both men and women, is contemplating. I mean, today, right, a lot of this happens is when you get other people close to each other and they get emotionally attached and then they get divorced. My mom and dad both worked in Ford factory. And think about this, because this is always, I believe, has always been a danger. When you're a husband and wife and you go to work and you work 5 to 6 days a week and you spend 9 hours working by someone else for 9 hours a day, you get invested in that person, and before long, there could be a relationship that starts. And when that relationship starts, there is a divorce. And why is that? Because you have two people spending a lot of time together. And so there is a danger of that happening. But we're not talking about friendship. We're talking about desiring someone to take them from somewhere else. Number 6, this is true. The thoughts of sin are greater or harder than its sin itself. You say, what do you mean the thoughts of sin are greater or harder than the sin itself? It is harder for us to get those thoughts out of our head than to actually go through the actual action. Because to get to the action, we got to first go through our head and our emotions and our feelings to attach us to someone else. And so, if we can detach that first, this will never happen. But this first is often hard for us, for people to deal with. The constant thinking, oh, man, if she was my wife, man, I would be this. Or if she was my wife, man, I would look really better. Or if she was my wife, she makes a lot of money. If she was my wife, I'd be happier. If she was my wife, man, my kids might look really, really beautiful. It's always thinking about something for that attraction of emotion. And so Jesus is talking about how hard that is, right? Because we have been told in the Bible in Proverbs 4:23 to keep our heart with all diligence, because out of it comes these issues of life. And we're reminded, right, in 2 Corinthians 10:5, casting down imaginations, everything that exalted in knowledge. I can't speak for the women, but speaking for a man, I would say that for men, it's harder for us to turn off something to emotional attraction to a woman than it is to drive down the road and say, oh, there's a bank, I need money, I'm going to rob it. We could say, oh, I'll turn that off. We won't think about that anymore. But culture has allowed us to keep our focus on different things that really draws our attention away from the things that Christ would have us. So, number 9, Jesus equates lustful thoughts with the act of adultery to bring a believer to understand the severity of sin itself. So, what's so bad about it? Well, number 10, there are consequences to feeding such lustful thoughts as to break a commitment that was made to a marriage between a man and a woman. Those consequences, number 11, are devastate everyone involved. But our culture today seems that they have the answers to the consequences of sin, but they fail to meet the righteousness of Christ. Okay? So what's the remedy? Well, Jesus makes a hyperbole, hyperbole, for a person to combat a desire for another person's wife or a woman who is off the market, as we might say. Now, Jesus gives this radical solution to the problem. He says it's better to cut off. It's better for you to cut off or pluck out your own eyes or hands if they cause us to sin. Why the eyes and why the hands? Because our eyes see and our hands touch. It's better to get rid of that than it is to go into there. Now, number 3, Jesus is not advocating self-mutilation, but he uses this language to emphasize the seriousness of sin and the importance of self-control. It is better to lose something in this life than to lose our souls in the next because of a sinful desire. Number 3, we must also have the courage and discipline to eliminate anything or anyone that leads us to sin. And so if someone was having such an issue of being close to someone and emotionally attached and having feelings of trying to take them away from someone else, right? It would probably be better to end that relationship, maybe avoid certain places or activities with that person, to break from that behavior, and making sure that priority with God comes first. Number 4, seeking the Lord during difficult times is best suited in helping someone to overcome sinful thoughts that could lead to impure thoughts and adultery. Just remember that there's nothing that has come to us such as common to man when it comes to temptation, but God has been faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above all that you're able, but with all temptation has made a way to escape. Okay? Conclusion. Jesus emphasized the importance of marriage. Okay? The importance of marriage. God's intention for marriage is for it to be lifelong commitment, and divorce should not be taken lightly. That's what they were used to, that for any cause, right? Number 2, prioritizing our marriage and working towards reconciliation rather than divorce. Just remember that God has put us together, that we're not to be pulled asunder. And although we believe there are a few instances where divorce is granted, we also must emphasize this: grace and forgiveness is offered by God when people fall short in this area. Okay? I've known some churches who say that if you've been married and divorced, you're not welcome there. Okay? Regardless of marriage, divorce, or remarriage, what is the goal? The goal is to strengthen and have guidance in living a pure life. Because everybody can be forgiven. There's only one sin that's not forgivable, right? So all sin is forgiven. And it's the seeking of that pure life in Christ. Now, and that means that sometimes, number 5, we must commit to seeking accountability and intentionality guarding our minds and hearts. We're all in this boat tonight. Okay? We're all in that boat. Even if you're single, we're all in this boat, the same boat tonight. That we need to really guard our hearts, right? Have intentional guarding of our minds and hearts. Number 6, this is why it's important that we pray for marriages and families, right? This is why we pray for families and marriages. We want marriages to work. We want men and women to be happy in marriage. We want them to have a household of kids. Well, not a lot, but some, right? And we want those parents to be in the house, right? We want both the husband and the wife, the man and the woman to be in the house. That's why we pray for family. That's what we're supposed to do. Because we know what happens when that falls short. We also not be quick to give up our relationships, but seek to resolve issues through love, forgiveness, and communication. Sometimes marriages are very, very hard and difficult. I wish I could tell you a story. I can't. But wish I could tell you a story of a husband and wife. If I told you the story before I even got done with the first 3 lines, you would have told me you would expect that woman to divorce her husband based on the story. Can I tell you today they're still married? It was hard work getting there, but they got there. Number 8, we must strive for righteousness from the heart, not just outward actions. Let us remember our thoughts and desires and relationships matter to God as much as our actions do as well, right? So when we look at this, the Lord is looking at our heart in both accounts. He's expanding that line. He says this is the issue that we need to tackle so that these results don't happen. And if they do happen, do we believe that a person who's murdered another person can be forgiven and go to heaven? I do. Do we believe that if somebody got married and divorced and got remarried, that they can go to heaven? I do. Right? So he wants us to look at our attitude rather than the action afterwards. And so that's what he's getting at the Sermon on the Mount. And so you can imagine the Pharisees are not happy at this time. And he continues on. We'll look at some more things that Jesus says, not next week, but in a couple of weeks, okay? For those who are watching online, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you on Sunday.